The sky of the alien world was covered with heavy dark clouds. The air was filled with the smell of rain and dust. The marketplace was loud with voices of traders and villagers, but in the middle of this noisy place, one small figure stood out. It was a poor alien woman, weak and thin, with clothes torn and face dirty. She tried to move quietly, hoping nobody would notice her, but in this society, weakness was always noticed. People looked at her with cruel eyes. They laughed at her. They whispered to each other, calling her worthless, calling her trash. One big alien trader pushed her with his heavy hand. She lost her balance and fell into the filthy mud. The crowd laughed louder. Her hands trembled as she tried to stand, mud sticking to her face and hair, her eyes lowered in shame. But deep inside her heart, there was still a small fire. A spark of pride that refused to die. Children threw stones at her. Women mocked her voice. Men told her she should crawl like an insect. And yet she remained silent. She did not fight back, for she knew if she resisted, the punishment would be far worse. In this world, the weak were not allowed to rise. Then, while the crowd laughed, while the woman wiped mud from her face, a new figure appeared at the edge of the marketplace. He was tall, different, and his eyes were not the same as the others. He was not from this planet. He was a human man, a stranger in a land where no one welcomed outsiders. He stood still, watching the scene with a calm but sharp gaze. The rain began to fall, drops hitting his shoulders, but he did not move. His eyes followed the alien woman struggling in the mud, and though he did not speak, there was something strange about the way he looked at her. The crowd noticed him. Whispers began to spread. Who was this human? Why was he here? Some laughed, some cursed under their breath, but nobody dared to go and near him. There was something in his posture, something in his silence that made even the cruel villagers hesitate. The woman saw him too. She felt fear. She thought maybe he had come to mock her as well. Maybe he was another cruel soul who would enjoy her humiliation. But his eyes were not filled with laughter. They were filled with thought, with calculation, and maybe even something else. The rain grew heavier. Water running through the dirt, turning the ground into dark, sticky mud. The woman tried again to stand, but slipped. The crowd laughed louder, but the human man remained still, his boots sinking slightly into the wet ground, his coat dripping with water, his expression unreadable. At that moment, time seemed to slow. The woman felt the weight of every cruel voice, every laugh cutting into her. She felt like sinking into the earth itself. But when her eyes met his again, she felt something new, something she had never felt before. It was not kindness, not yet, but it was attention. Someone was truly looking at her, not as trash, not as dirt, but as a puzzle, as if she mattered somehow. The crowd grew restless. They wanted to know why the human was staring. Some shouted at him to leave, others warned him not to get involved, but he did not answer. His silence was louder than their voices. The woman finally stood, her body shaking, her clothes wet and dirty, the mud dripping from her arms. She held her head low, but in her heart, she felt the weight of his gaze. She did not know who he was. She did not know why he was here, but she could sense that something was about to change. The rain washed some of the mud from her face, revealing her tired but beautiful eyes, eyes that held both pain and courage. The human man saw them, and for the first time, the corner of his lips moved, not into a smile but into something that looked like recognition. The villagers did not understand. They thought he was a fool. They thought he wasted his time staring at a worthless creature. But deep inside, a storm was starting, a silent clash between cruelty and value, between what the crowd believed and what the stranger saw. The woman looked away quickly. She feared hope more than pain. Hope was dangerous. Hope could be crushed. Yet deep inside, that spark of pride in her heart began to grow warmer. The human took one step forward, his boots splashing in the mud. The crowd fell silent for a moment, watching him, his eyes never leaving the woman. And in that silence, a question rose in the air, a question no one dared to speak. Why was this human so interested in a woman that everyone else had thrown away? The answer was hidden, locked in his mind, but the moment was clear. This was not a meeting of chance. This was the beginning of something greater, something that would challenge the entire society. The woman did not know it yet. The crowd did not believe it, but the stranger had already seen what they could not. He had seen value in the mud. He had seen strength in weakness. He had seen a story waiting to begin. And so, under the heavy rain, in the middle of laughter and mud, a poor alien woman and a silent human man stood facing each other, and the universe itself seemed to hold its breath. The rain did not stop. It poured heavier, and the villagers slowly returned to their trading. Yet their eyes kept turning back to the human man who stood so still, his coat wet, his hair dripping with water, his eyes calm but sharp. He did not rush forward to help the alien woman. He did not speak to defend her. Instead, he watched, as if every cruel action, every mocking laugh was a piece of information. He studied them the way a hunter studies prey, or the way a soldier studies a battlefield. The alien woman tried to walk away, her body weak, her steps slow, the mud clinging to her legs, the shame heavier than the rain. But the man's gaze followed her, quiet and steady. She could feel it even when she looked down. It made her heart beat faster, not with fear alone, but with something she could not name. He walked slowly behind her, keeping a distance, his boots sinking into the wet ground. The villagers whispered again. Some laughed, some frowned, some warned each other. This human was strange. This human did not act like others. The alien society had many laws, unwritten but strict. The strong could do anything. The weak had no right to complain. Everyone knew this rule. Everyone accepted it, except perhaps this human stranger. The woman reached a broken wall at the end of the market. She leaned against it to catch her breath, her hands shaking, her body cold. She whispered to herself that she must keep moving, must survive the day. But before she could take another step, she felt the shadow of the man behind her. She turned slowly, her eyes wide, the rain dripping from her face. She expected mockery. She expected another hand ready to strike her down, but the man only stood there, his face calm, his eyes fixed on her with strange focus. For a moment they said nothing, only the sound of the rain filled the air. Then a voice from the crowd shouted, "Leave her, human. She is nothing." The man did not answer. Another voice laughed, "Are you looking for a servant? Take her. She will work for free. She is not worth even food." Again he was silent. Silence was his weapon, and silence made the villagers uneasy. They expected words, they expected noise, but instead he only observed, as if their cruelty was a play, and he was the judge sitting in the dark. The woman lowered her head. She whispered, "Do not look at me. I am nothing." Her voice was soft, broken. The man tilted his head slightly. But still he said nothing. His silence was heavier than words. He looked around the marketplace. He saw how others treated each other. He saw the strong eat while the weak starved. He saw a child cry and be slapped into silence. He saw laughter used as a weapon, and in his heart, he judged them. The human had seen many worlds. He had traveled across galaxies. He had walked among empires and ruins. But this world was different. Its cruelty was not hidden. It was celebrated, and that cruelty told him more about them than any words could. The alien woman tried to step away again, her legs heavy, but he raised one hand, not to strike, only to pause her, his gesture calm, his eyes firm. She froze, her breath caught in her chest. She did not understand. From the shadows of the market, another alien appeared, a tall guard with sharp armor and cruel eyes. He shouted at the woman, calling her useless, calling her dirt. He struck her with his staff. She cried out and fell to her knees again. The crowd laughed, but the man's eyes narrowed. For the first time, his silence cracked. His voice was low but strong. "Enough," he said. The word cut through the rain, cut through the laughter. The guard stopped for a moment, surprised that an outsider dared to speak. The villagers held their breath. The woman looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Nobody ever said enough for her. Nobody had ever stopped the cruelty. Her heart beat faster, her body shaking. The guard laughed and pointed at the man. "You defend her, human, then you will suffer with her." But the man did not flinch. He did not move back. His eyes only grew colder. He was not afraid. The woman felt both fear and hope at the same time. Fear that the human would be destroyed. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she was not invisible anymore. The rain washed over them. The market grew quieter. Whispers spread again. Why does he care? What does he see in her? They could not undo it. Stand. But he did not care for their questions. He had already seen something they refused to see. In her eyes, in her silence, in her broken steps, he saw not weakness but hidden strength. He saw a spirit that had survived endless humiliation, and he knew that such a spirit was rare, rarer than gold, rarer than any treasure. He let the moment stretch, let the guard and the villagers wait for his answer. Then he spoke again, his words simple, "I will watch." And with those words he declared that the woman was no longer alone. The villagers did not clap, they did not cheer, but they felt uneasy. The rules of their world had been shaken. One human, one outsider, had dared to look at trash and call it something more. The woman lowered her eyes. tears mixed with rain. She did not understand why he stayed, but for the first time in her life, she felt seen, not as dirt, not as worthless, but as something worth watching, something worth protecting. And in that moment, though the world was still cruel, though the crowd still mocked, though the guards still threatened, a seed of change was planted, a seed that would grow into fire. The human man observed, the alien woman trembled, the villagers whispered, and the universe itself seemed to prepare for the storm that was about to come. The morning after the storm, the alien woman rose before the sun, her body still weak, her back still aching from the blows of the guard. She carried a broken basket and walked toward the edge of the village. The streets were filled with mud. The smell of wet soil and rotting food filled the air. Every day was the same for her. Survival was the only goal. She collected scraps, she cleaned dirt, she carried heavy stones for no pay, and if she was lucky, she would find a piece of stale bread to eat. If unlucky, she would go to sleep with nothing in her stomach. The society around her was built on cruelty. The strong took what they wanted, the weak gave what they had, and the leaders allowed it because it kept power in their hands. Rules did not protect the poor, rules only chained them. The woman walked slowly to the river to fetch water, her steps heavy, her arms trembling. When she reached the bank, she bent down. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark water, her face dirty, her eyes hollow. Yet there was still that spark, that small light deep inside her. She remembered the man from yesterday, the human who had spoken one word for her. Enough. She whispered the word to herself. It sounded strange on her tongue. Strange but powerful. Nobody had ever said that for her. Nobody had ever stood against the cruelty. Back in the village, the human walked among the stalls, his eyes sharp, his movements slow and careful. He studied everything. He saw the way food was hoarded by the rich while the poor starved. He saw the way children were beaten for crying. He saw the way guards treated common people like dirt. And he kept all of this inside his mind. He did not come here by chance. He had traveled far, crossing empty space to reach this world. And now he knew the rumors were true. This was a place where cruelty was normal, where mercy was weakness. And yet in the middle of this dark world, he had found something unexpected. The villagers kept their distance from him. Some watched with suspicion, some with fear, some with hatred. They whispered to each other, "Why does he stay? What does he want? Why does he look at the woman as if she matters?" Their whispers followed him like shadows, but he did not answer them. The woman returned to the village with her basket of water, her arms shaking. The moment she stepped into the marketplace, another group of villagers blocked her way. One grabbed her basket and spilled the water on the ground. They laughed as the mud splashed her feet. "Worthless," they said. "Why do you even try?" She bowed her head, ready to accept the insult, but then she noticed him again. The human, standing in the distance, watching, always watching, his eyes steady. She felt her heart race, and for the first time she tried to straighten her back. She tried not to fall. The crowd laughed, but she did not cry. She carried the empty basket back, her steps firm though her heart trembled, and the man's eyes followed her. He saw the small change. He saw the courage that even she did not realize was there. Later, in the shadows of the night, the human found himself walking the alleys of the village. Guards patrolled the streets, their weapons sharp, their eyes cruel. They demanded coins from the poor. They broke doors. They dragged weak men into the streets. The human's jaw tightened, his fists clenched, but he stayed silent. He knew this was not the time. The world was dangerous, not only for the woman, but for anyone who dared to go against the rules. He could see it clearly now. The society survived on fear, and anyone who refused to bow was destroyed. The woman slept on the floor of a broken hut, the roof leaking, the wind cold. She curled into herself, her stomach empty, her heart heavy. But in her dreams, she saw the face of the man, his eyes steady, his voice saying, "Enough." And for the first time in many years, she dreamed of something different. She dreamed of hope. The next morning, she was ordered to carry stones for the building of the council hall. Her body was weak, but she obeyed. Holly's ear back bent under the heavy weight. The guards mocked her, saying she moved slower than a dying beast. The villagers laughed as she stumbled. But again he was there, the human, standing in the distance, his eyes locked on her. She felt his presence like a shield. She could not understand it. Why would he care? Why would he watch? But because of him, she refused to fall. One of the guards grew angry. He struck her with his stick. Her knees bent. Pain shot through her body. But before she touched the ground, she forced herself up again, her eyes full of tears but also fire. The crowd gasped. They had never seen her rise after a blow. The man's lips curved slightly, not a smile, but something close. He saw the fire in her, and he knew he was right. She was not weak. She was surviving in a dangerous world that tried every day to break her. The villagers whispered again. Something is wrong. She is changing. He is watching her. Something will happen. And for the first time, fear entered their whispers, because they knew when the weak begin to rise, the rules of the world begin to shake. The night fell again, the stars hidden behind thick clouds, the village silent except for the sound of guards marching. The woman lay in her hut, her body broken, her eyes heavy, but her heart beating faster, because deep inside, she felt it. The dangerous world had not changed, but she had, and the man, the human, was still watching, waiting, and preparing for the storm that was yet to come. The days in the village grew heavier. Tension hung in the air like smoke after fire. The human man's quiet defense of the alien woman had not been forgotten. Whispers turned into rumors. Rumors turned into warnings. And soon even the leaders began to take notice. The woman felt the change most of all. Whenever she walked through the marketplace, eyes followed her, not with pity now, but with suspicion and anger. Some spat on the ground as she passed, some muttered curses, some shouted that she was cursed, all because one outsider had dared to speak for her. She tried to live as she always had, silent, invisible, but she could not hide anymore. She could not erase the memory of his voice saying, "Enough." She could not ignore the way his eyes still found her each day, calm, steady, unshaken. One morning the woman carried water from the well, her steps slow, her arms trembling, and a group of young men blocked her path, their faces twisted with hate. "You think you are special now," one shouted, "because the stranger looks at you." Another grabbed her arm and pushed her down. The basket spilled, water soaking the dirt. The crowd laughed. Before she could rise, before the pain could swallow her, the man appeared, his shadow falling across the ground, his eyes sharp as blades. He spoke only 2 words. "Step back." His voice calm, but filled with power. The men froze. They tried to laugh, tried to mock him. "Why do you care for her, human? She is nothing. She is filth." But the man stepped closer, his presence heavy like a storm, his silence louder than their laughter. And for the first time, the young men backed away, their courage melting into fear. The crowd gasped. They had seen guards strike her without consequence. They had seen villagers beat her for sport. But now, the human stood between her and the cruelty, his stance firm, his eyes unblinking. The rules of their world were being broken before their eyes. The woman's heart raced. She trembled as she looked at him. She whispered, "Why?" her voice shaking. But he did not answer. He only helped her to her feet, steady and calm. From that day, the threats grew worse. Whispers spread like fire. "The human is dangerous. The human defies us. The human protects the worthless." The leaders of the village met in secret, their voices cold. They spoke of removing him before he destroyed the order they ruled. At night, the woman sat alone in her broken hut. She pressed her hands together, her body shaking. She feared for him more than for herself. She knew what the leaders could do. She had seen them destroy anyone who dared to rise, and yet he did not seem afraid. The next morning, as she worked in the fields, a guard struck her again, harder than before. The crowd laughed, waiting to see her fall, waiting to see her crawl in the mud. But once again, the man was there, his voice sharp. "Stop!" His hand caught the guard's staff. The wood cracked under his grip. The guard stepped back in shock. The crowd went silent. Nobody had ever touched a guard's weapon. Nobody had ever stopped a blow. The guard shouted in anger, "You will pay for this, human." But the man's eyes burned with fire, and for the first time the guard turned away, humiliated in front of the crowd. The woman's heart pounded. She could not believe what she had seen. No one had ever stood for her. No one had ever risked angering the guards. Yet this man, a stranger, did it without hesitation. But courage has a price, and the price was coming. That night, the leaders gathered in the council hall, torches burning, their faces hard. "This human is dangerous," one said. "He is changing her. He is changing the people. If the weak begin to believe they have value, we will lose control." Another slammed his fist. "Then he must be removed." The plan was made. The guards were ordered to watch him, to wait for a mistake, to break him when the time came. The dangerous game had begun. The woman sensed the danger. She tried to warn him, her voice trembling. "They will hurt you. They will destroy you. Please do not stand for me anymore." But the man only looked at her, his eyes steady, his voice calm. I choose. Those two words struck her deeper than any weapon. Nobody had ever chosen her. Nobody had ever risked and killed. I think for her, she felt tears fall, not from pain, but from something she had forgotten long ago. Hope. The villagers grew restless. Some whispered that the human was a fool. Some whispered that maybe he was right. Cracks began to form in their cruel order. Cracks that frightened the leaders. Cracks that gave the woman strength. One day, as the sun sank low and the shadows grew long, the guards confronted the man in the marketplace. The woman watched in terror, her heart frozen. The crowd gathered, eager to see the human crushed, eager to see the rules restored. But the man stood tall, his presence unshaken, his eyes burning like fire in the dark. The guards raised their weapons. The woman's voice broke in fear. Please, she whispered, her body trembling, and in that moment she realized the truth. The conflict was no longer about her alone. It was about what she represented, the idea that even the weak, even the broken could have value. The human knew it too, and that was why he would not back down. The storm had begun, and the world they knew would never be the same again. The village was no longer the same. The presence of the human had shaken the ground. People whispered in fear, some whispered in secret hope, but the leaders grew restless. They could not allow their order to break, and their eyes turned with sharper hate toward the woman and the man who stood for her. The woman felt it too. Every step she took was heavier. Every glance at her carried both anger and fear. She was still poor, still weak, but now she carried a strange weight, the weight of attention, the weight of possibility, and that frightened her more than hunger. The man walked beside the shadows, silent, but always near, his eyes watching, his steps firm. He seemed to know what was coming, and he was ready. One night, the woman sat outside her broken hut, the stars hidden by thick clouds, the air heavy with silence. She whispered to herself, "Why does he stay? Why does he risk his life for me?" Her voice cracked, she pressed her hands together, and suddenly she remembered something, a memory buried deep, long ago. Before she was cast aside, before she was beaten down, her mother had told her a secret about their blood. Her people had once carried knowledge, old and powerful, knowledge that could guide, heal, and even change the course of worlds. But when greed took over, that knowledge was buried, and those who still carried it were silenced. Her heart raced as she realized the truth. She was one of the last who carried that memory, not in books, not in symbols, but in her mind, in her blood, in her very being. And that was why her people hated her. That was why they treated her as dirt. They feared what they did not want to see. The man seemed to sense her thoughts, for he stepped closer, his voice calm. "You carry something." She froze, her eyes wide. "What do you mean?" He did not smile, he only said, "I have seen it before. In other worlds, those who are crushed often carry what the rulers fear the most." Tears filled her eyes. She whispered, "I am nothing." But he shook his head. "No, you are more. You are the key they want to bury." His words cut into her heart like fire. She trembled. She did not want to believe, and yet deep inside, she knew it was true. The next morning, the council summoned her. Guards dragged her into the hall. The villagers gathered to watch. Her body weak, her knees scraped, her heart pounding. The leaders sat high on their stone seats, their eyes cold, their voices sharp. "You are dangerous," one leader hissed. "Not because of your strength, for you have none, not because of your beauty, for it has faded, but because you remain, and the people of something we buried long ago." The hall grew silent. The villagers leaned forward. The leaders spoke again. "Your kind once carried the knowledge of the ancients, but we ended it, and now you must be ended too." The woman gasped. Her secret was no longer a whisper. It was spoken aloud. She trembled, her body cold. She looked around for the man, but the guards held him outside. Yet even outside the doors, his voice rang out, "You fear her because she is truth." The crowd turned. The guards shouted at him to leave, but he stood firm, his eyes blazing. "She is worth more than your throne, more than your power, more than your lies." The leaders shouted for silence, but the words had already spread. The villagers looked at the woman differently now, not only as dirt, not only as worthless, but as something hidden, something feared, something valuable. The guards dragged the man forward, his arms bound, his face calm, but his eyes never leaving hers. The leaders raised their voices. "He corrupts you, he blinds you, he dares to lift filth into the light." They struck him, but he did not fall. He stood straight, blood on his lips, his eyes burning brighter. The woman cried out, her voice shaking, "Stop, please!" But the leaders only laughed. This is the price of protecting trash. They raised their weapons, ready to strike again. And then, in that moment, something happened. The woman's fear turned into fire. The memory of her mother's words burned in her heart. The ancient knowledge stirred in her blood. Her voice rose, clear and sharp. I am not trash. The hall went silent. The villagers froze. The leader's eyes widened. Her voice echoed like thunder. Though she was weak, though she was trembling, something in her words carried power. The kind of power they had tried to bury. The man smiled faintly, blood on his lips but fire in his eyes. He whispered, "There it is." The leaders shouted for guards to silence her, but the villagers did not laugh this time. They did not mock. They felt something stir inside them, something they had long forgotten. Hope. The woman stepped forward, her body weak but her eyes blazing. You fear me because I carry what you lost. You fear me because you know truth cannot be killed. Her voice cracked but did not break. The guards hesitated for the first time. Their hands shook. They looked at each other, unsure if they should obey. The power of her words was heavier than the orders of their masters. The man pulled free from his bindings, his strength returning, his eyes blazing with pride. He moved to her side, standing tall. The crowd gasped. The leaders shouted. The guards froze. In that moment, everything shifted. The poor alien woman who had once been humiliated and thrown into mud now stood in the council hall, her voice echoing with power, her eyes filled with fire, and the man stood beside her, proving with his very presence that she had value. The revelation was complete. She was not weak, she was not worthless, she was the memory of a truth her people had buried, and now it was rising again, and with that truth, the war between fear and hope had begun. The council hall shook with silence. The villagers stood frozen. The guards held their weapons but did not move. The leaders shouted for order, but their voices carried fear, not power. The alien woman stood tall, though her body trembled. Her voice still echoed in the hearts of everyone present. I am not trash. Those words refused to fade. They lingered like fire in the air. The man stood beside her, blood on his face, his eyes burning with quiet pride. The leaders rose from their seats, their anger sharp. She is a liar, one roared. She is nothing, another shouted. The human poisons your minds. Their words lashed like whips, but the crowd no longer laughed. The crowd no longer mocked. They watched in silence, waiting. The woman turned her eyes toward the villagers, her voice soft but steady. You know this world is cruel. You know how many of you suffer in silence. You know how many of you are broken every day, and you know why. Because you let them tell you that you are nothing, but you are not nothing. You are alive, and life has value. The words struck deeper than any weapon. Mothers held their children closer. Men clenched their fists. Even the guards shifted uncomfortably. The human took a step forward, his voice low but strong. Humans do not measure worth by status. We measure it by courage, by spirit, by the will to rise. And she has more courage than any of you who sit on thrones of fear. His words rolled like thunder. The leaders shouted for silence again, their faces twisted with rage. They ordered the guards to strike, but the guards hesitated. The spark of doubt had entered their eyes. One guard stepped forward, his weapon raised. The woman's heart raced, but before he could strike, the man moved. His hand caught the weapon, his strength breaking it in two. The guard stumbled back, fear flashing across his face. The hall erupted with gasps. The villagers began to murmur, not with laughter this time, but with hope. Small at first, but spreading like fire, the leaders banged their fists. You will destroy us all, they shouted. Without fear, there is no order. But the woman lifted her head, her eyes shining through tears. Without hope, there is no life. Her voice carried beyond the hall, carried into the streets. Villagers outside turned their heads. They listened. They whispered. The sound spread through the village like wind through dry grass. The leaders grew desperate. They commanded the guards again, but the guards no longer obeyed. Their hands shook. Their eyes turned to the woman, to the man, and they lowered their weapons. The council's power crumbled before their eyes, and for the first time in years, the villagers saw fear on the faces of their rulers. The woman felt her knees weaken, but the man placed his hand on her shoulder, steady and firm. His voice whispered to her, "Stand, this is your moment." She drew a breath, her chest rising, her voice rising with it. "We are more than what you call us," she said, her words strong. "We are not insects. We are not trash. We are living beings, and no throne, no guard, no fear can take that away." The villagers shouted, not in laughter this time, but in voices that shook the hall. "Enough! Enough!" they cried, repeating the same word the man had spoken days ago, the same word that had broken the silence. The leaders stepped back, their power broken. They shouted threats, but their voices were drowned in the roar of the people. The man's eyes met hers, calm, steady, proud. He whispered only one word, "Rise." And she did. She stood taller than she ever had. Her face still dirty, her clothes still torn, but her spirit brighter than fire. The people surged forward not to harm her, but to stand beside her. The crowd that once mocked her now shouted with her. The guards who once struck her now lowered their heads. The leaders who once ruled her now trembled in fear. The woman had been humiliated, thrown into mud, beaten, mocked. But now she stood as proof that even the weakest could rise. Proof that value was not given by rulers but carried in the soul. The human turned to the villagers, his voice carrying across the hall. "This is what it means to be human, to see value where others see none, to raise the fallen, to give worth to the forgotten. Humani. Tai is not strength of arm, it is strength of heart, and today you have seen it." Tears fell from her eyes, but they were no longer tears of shame. They were tears of freedom. She looked at him, her voice soft. "Why me?" And he answered simply, "Because you never broke, even when the world tried to break you." The villagers shouted louder, the leaders fled into the shadows. The council hall shook not from fear but from hope. And so, under the same sky where she had once been pushed into mud, under the same eyes that had once mocked her, the poor alien woman now stood valued, honored, and unbroken. The human man beside her did not smile, but his silence was full of meaning. He had seen her worth when no one else would. He had lifted her without chains, without pity, with only truth. The story of cruelty had become a story of courage. The story of shame had become a story of hope. And the story of one poor alien woman had become a story for all. And in the heart of the universe, a truth rang clear. Sometimes it takes an outsider to remind the world that every life, no matter how broken, carries value that no mud can erase.